"Very well," answered the king. "But if you fail, you will pay for it with your head," and signed that both should leave his presence. The cook was still trembling with the thought of what he had escaped, but to his surprise, Paperarello did not seem disturbed at all, and when night came, he went to sleep as usual. "Paperarello," cried the other servants when they saw him quietly taking off his clothes, "you cannot go to bed. You'll need every moment of the night for your work. Remember, the king is not to be played with." "I really must have some sleep first," replied Paperarello, stretching himself and yawning, and he flung himself on his bed and was fast asleep in a moment. In an hour's time the servants came and shook him by the shoulder. "Paperarello, are you mad?" said they. "Get up, or you will lose your head." "Oh, do let me sleep a little more," answered he. And this was all he would say, though the servants returned to wake him many times in the night. At last the dawn broke, and the servants rushed to his room, crying, "Paperarello! Paperarello! Get up, the king is coming. You have baked no bread, and of a surety he will have your head." "Oh, don't scream so," replied Paperarello, jumping out of bed as he spoke, and taking the lock of hair in his hand, he went into the kitchen, and behold, there stood the bread piled high, 4, 5, 6 ovens full, and the 7th still waiting to be taken out of the oven. The servants stood and stared in surprise, and the king said, "Well done, Paperarello, you have won my daughter." And he thought to himself, "This fellow must really be a magician." But when the princess heard what was in store for her, she wept bitterly and declared that never, never would she marry that dirty Paperarello. However, the king paid no heed to her tears and prayers, and before many days were over, the wedding was celebrated with great splendor, though the bridegroom had not taken the trouble to wash himself and was as dirty as before. When night came, he went as usual to sleep among his geese, and the princess went to the king and said, "Father, I entreat you to have that horrible Paperarello put to death." "No, no," replied her father. "He is a great magician, and before I put him to death, I must first find out the secret of his power, and then we shall see." Soon after this, a war broke out, and everybody about the palace was very busy polishing up armor and sharpening swords, for the king and his sons were to ride at the head of the army. Then Paperarello left his geese and came and told the king that he wished to go to fight also. The king gave him leave and told him that he might go to the stable and take any horse he liked from the stables. So Paperarello examined the horses carefully, but instead of picking out one of the splendid, well-groomed creatures whose skin shone like satin, he chose a poor lame thing, put a saddle on it, and rode after the other men-at-arms who were attending the king. In a short time he stopped and said to them, "My horse can go no further. You must go on to the war without me, and I will stay here and make some little clay soldiers, and will play at a battle." The men laughed at him for being so childish, and rode on after their master. Scarcely were they out of sight than Paperarello took out his curl and wished himself the best armor, the sharpest sword, and the swiftest horse in the world, and the next minute was riding as fast as he could to the field of battle. The fight had already begun, and the enemy was getting the best of it when Paperarello rode up, and in a moment the fortunes of the day had changed. Right and left this strange knight laid about him, and his sword pierced the stoutest breastplate and the strongest shield. He was indeed a host in himself, and his foes fled before him, thinking he was only the first of a troop of such warriors whom no one could withstand. When the battle was over, the king sent for him to thank him for his timely help, and to ask what reward he should give him. "Nothing but your little finger, your majesty," was his answer. And the king cut off his little finger and gave it to Paperarello, who bowed and hid it in his surcoat. Then he left the field, and when the soldiers rode back, they found him still sitting in the road, making whole rows of little clay dolls. The next day the king went out to fight another battle, and again Paperarello appeared mounted on his lame horse. As on the day before, He halted on the road and sat down to make his clay soldiers. Then a second time he wished himself armor, sword, and a horse, all sharper and better than those he had previously had, and galloped after the rest. He was only just in time. The enemy had almost beaten the king's army back, and men whispered to each other that if the strange knight did not soon come to their aid, they would be all dead men. Suddenly someone cried, "Hold on a little longer, I see him in the distance, and his armor shines brighter and his horse runs swifter than yesterday." Then they took fresh heart, and fought desperately on till the knight came up and threw himself into the thick of the battle. As before, the enemy gave way before him, and in a few minutes the victory remained with the king. The first thing that the victor did was to send for the knight to thank him for his timely help, and to ask what gift he could bestow on him in token of gratitude. "Your Majesty's ear," answered the knight, and as the king could not go back from his word, he cut it off and gave it to him. Paperarello bowed, fastening the ear inside his surcoat, and rode away. In the evening, when they all returned from the battle, there he was, sitting in the road, making clay dolls.